Okay, everybody ready to go? All right, great. So today is Monday, March 3rd, 2025. We've got our board budget workshop. So we will call to order and establish the quorum. We've got Carlin Fryer, Maritza Gonzalez Cooper, Garrett Wilson, Christy Schmidt, Courtney Darter Bruce, Rich Sinna, and Dallas is probably coming. So there's 6 of the 7 of us. We do, and there's Dallas Pipes as well. So we got 7 of the 7. We definitely have a quorum, and we do not have any public comments, no visitor comments. So we will not do that. And at this time, we will go into our budget workshop. It is 5:31.
All right, thank you, President Wilson. Great to see everybody again. March 3rd, today we had a lot of excitement this morning, so just want to say thank you for helping us to celebrate the ribbon cutting at the Voss Middle School EMS station, the partnership with Kendall County. And then also we had some exciting announcements today over at Faber Elementary School, where Mr. Ladiolis was officially recognized as a finalist for Elementary Principal of the Year with HEB. And so he will go into the running to be named as, have an opportunity to be selected as the Principal of the Year. And that will take place at some very special events that HEB hosts for all of their statewide winners the first part of May. So we'll keep you posted on that. So tonight for our budget workshop, we're going to start with an overview of a committee that you have heard a lot about. And 3 of our trustees who are on the finance committee have been a part of this work. And this is our opportunity to give the full board a recap of the important work that took place there. So Mr. Scott will lead that part. And then we'll get to our second item, which will be a talk on compensation and all things talent from Ms. Rhodes-Pruin.
All right, I guess we'll start off by recognizing if you participated in the Budget Strategy Advisory Committee, would you stand up, please? We've got a few, or raise your hand. Got a few folks that appreciate them being here tonight. They can hold me accountable so I don't make up stuff. I think we're going to start off with a video.
I think community activism is really, really important. And what's amazing about Boerne is we just have a wealth of talent here, and the ability to be able to participate and learn more about the district and find ways to be able to serve in a way that I think benefits all of our kids and our community at large.
My biggest takeaway was just really understanding how much Boerne ISD is doing and how little we're doing it with. School districts are not funded equally, right? And so Boerne ISD, while we want to do all those things, we're doing it with so much less. And it's so imperative that we have additional funding so that we can take care of our students and our teachers in the way they deserve to be taken care of, and so that we can compete with the districts and communities around us.
The other thing that I think even surprised me more, outside of the basic allotment and how that's already really low, but any additional state funding, we as a community and nonprofits within Boerne give more per student than that additional funding from the state.
I hope that this committee and the people that are in it can go out and appropriately inform their friends and family and small communities about the challenges that Boerne ISD and every other public school in Texas is facing, and then have some key strategies on how to conquer those challenges.
All right, and just a reminder, the goal of the advisory committee were to examine possibilities in revenues and expenditures to create capacity so that we could address legislative action that might not be appropriate or adequate, so that we could provide competitive salaries for our employees, address program needs and facility maintenance needs as we grow as a district. The committee charge was to look at current and long-term financial needs, specifically around growth and capacity, evolving educational programs, and operational efficiency and sustainability. we need to primarily consider the needs of students and be sure that whatever we come up with aligns with the district's mission, vision, and values. And then the committee is supposed to generate recommendations that address growth and needs based on the priorities that we identified, and then advocate for the district to the community and to the state at large. We had 5 meetings. We started off with a school finance overview, transitioned in the second meeting to just the current state financial climate. We had Dr. Amanda Brownson come in and speak to that. And then we identified what the working groups were going to look like and got those folks separated into their groups. The next 2 sessions after that were mostly taken up with those working groups working together to come up with recommendations. They presented those recommendations in the 4th meeting. In the 5th meeting, we all came together to get consensus on those recommendations. All right, here are the 4 working groups: operational efficiency, retain and recruit quality staff, revenue generation, and reach and impact. The guiding priorities for the operational efficiency group, that was to maximize productivity, reduce redundancies, be efficient as we can without jeopardizing outcomes, and ensure long-term sustainability. Here are the 4 recommendations that came out of the operational efficiency group. All of these graphs will be presented we're going from the purple to the green, going from strongly agree to the light purple would be strongly disagree. And so consider options to find efficiencies in property insurance was the first recommendation. To research efficiency in the transportation department. To consider forcing a 10% reduction in contracted services as those contracts come up for renewal. And then the last recommendation was to reduce department budgets by 5 to 10%. Here are the guiding priorities for the, and we have one more member of our VSAC committee. We're glad he's here. Good deal. Here's the guiding priorities for the retain and recruit working group, and that was to build a supportive culture, refine the pipeline to growth and investment, protect the classroom, get the best teacher for every classroom while staying competitive in the market. Here are 4 recommendations from that working group: to invest in teacher self-development, to create a committee for options outside of TRS Active Care, which is our how we address healthcare, our health insurance, at this point in time, to explore the teacher investment allotment, and to explore adding special education stipends. Here are the guiding priorities for the revenue generation group. To maximize current revenue streams, look for sustainable opportunities to generate new revenue, consider the cost, benefit, and hidden costs of revenue opportunities. And I believe we've got 2 slides for the recommendations that came out of this group. The first one is to study programming to maximize weighted average daily attendance, to consider steps to access the remaining golden pennies, to increase facility rental fees, to study naming and advertisement of facilities, to increase fees related to student parking, to explore fee-based summer programming, and to explore adding fees for in-district transfer. These are the recommendations. We'd like to open it up for discussion at this point in time. So if y'all have any questions or comments on those recommendations, we would certainly like to talk to you about it.
Throughout these 5 meetings, the team early on was looking at a lot of data, and we presented benchmark data We had a series of, I don't know, was it 20 or 25 different districts we consider as a benchmark. And so all of our meeting information is posted online. And so teams really dug into a lot of information. We're asking questions, which really led then to the guiding priorities. But there were some very clear areas that they felt strongly in.
One of them was the golden penny one, which I kind of have mixed feelings on, but I think the way the state's funding formula is kind of changing with that golden penny allotment, it almost kind of forces your hand to, and I see that kind of coming down the road, is that's the way they want you to utilize all your golden pennies before you're allowed any more money, which I don't necessarily agree with, but that's the road we're on. So was that taken into consideration, what they would perceive with the changes to the penny allotment, whatever the increase is, what the state's looking at? Were they brought into that fold?
If I understand your question right, we provided a lot of detail related to the golden penny allotment when Dr. Brownson was here at the second meeting talking about the state financial climate. She showed a number of districts and their efforts in a comparison to Boerne ISD. That did prompt some questions from the audience. I don't know if it was, well, I can say it wasn't intentional, but it prompted questions from the audience about what's the difference between XXX district and ours. And Dr. Brownson's simple response was they had accessed their golden pennies, and when the committee heard about that, there was a lot of demand for that subject. So we did dive into the subject of golden pennies, how it could benefit the district, how it would impact the taxpayer.
Let me be clear, like what I was actually asking is kind of like a two-part. One, were they kind of brought into the fold on the way the state is changing and kind of weighting that golden penny, and how they've been moving through sessions, putting more weight on the golden penny? And then two, what's been projected of what they want the weighting of the golden penny to look like through this next legislative session?
We definitely addressed the second part of that. We did not address the first part of that. All right. So we're gonna.
These are some great ideas, by the way. What was kind of the explore fee-based summer programming? What were kind of some thoughts behind that?
I might let John here led that group, and I might let him speak to that a little bit.
So we looked at that on the revenue subcommittee from two different kind of standpoints. One was it could assist with recruitment and retention for teachers because it would provide our teachers. We're thinking of giving teachers the opportunity to do for-profit camps over the summer. So think like GT camps for elementary teachers, robotics camps, where they could charge tuition and the teacher would be able to keep that particular money, right? So for that piece, we thought, that'd be one thing we could do. And then we also talked a little bit about options for reducing our costs for summer school. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here. I'm trying to do this. Reducing our costs for summer school by perhaps providing original credit opportunities for a cost to students, and then using those dollars to subsidize the price of summer school for kids that were there for EOC remediation or credit recovery.
So kind of like what we're already doing in athletics for camps and that sort of thing, but bringing it to academics.
Yes, and kind of expanding it a little bit. Like we've got some athletic camps at the high school level. We have a few like fine arts camps, but there are some other districts that do a broader range of camps for younger students during the summer.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. And did you have another one, Ms. Schmidt?
On the retain and recruit, it says invest in teachers' self-development. Can you elaborate on that one?
Ms. Pruitt can.
So one of the things that we talked about was possibly finding ways to explore the district paying for advanced degrees and additional types of training. We talked about possible grant opportunities. I know right now in Larissa's team, they have a grant that allows individuals to get their master's degree in bilingual bicultural studies at no cost. And so really trying to think through what other opportunities we might be able to explore.
Very nice.
Thank you. under operational efficiency as well. Can you kind of maybe explain a little bit what it looks like to research efficiency in the transportation department, kind of what some ideas would be there?
So a couple of the things that they talked about there specifically was related to how we're using the shuttle program right now, of what we're transporting students for, mostly during the school day. They also talked about what's called a triple tier bell schedule. I don't know that we're quite ready to do that right now, but actually, Dr. O'Hare is pretty familiar with the implementation of a triple tier schedule, but we talked about that as well.
Was one of them regarding the rental fees?
Yes, ma'am.
And what, are there certain, does everyone get charged if they use the facility? And if so, do we have criteria? And are we thinking of increasing that, or what?
We certainly have board policy and then procedures related to facility rental, right? And whether somebody is charged or not charged somewhat depends on the nature of the entity that's renting a facility from us. I'm going to kind of talk off of the top of my head there. I know normally school districts don't charge like a Boy Scout troop that wants to utilize facilities, but would charge somebody that wanted to use the gym for a youth basketball program. And so I know that we're going to undergo a substantial revision of our contracts, the risk associated with renting those, and the fees involved in them, because it just hasn't been examined in a while. So
I have a question. I really like the idea of the clubs or summer programs. Just thinking about, like, as far as early education reading and stuff like that, especially with like dyslexic and stuff, if we can keep that through the summer, I think that's a huge net positive for everybody. If teachers can benefit from that, then I'm in favor of it. Question though, and this might be because I'm a rookie, is which one of I would love to know which one of these we could act on relatively in the next 60 days and actually have them in place before next school system. Because I know a lot of the finances ones, would take a vote, different things that would take maybe a year to put in place. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some great ideas here. I would love to see which ones could be in place this summer, is it next summer, and as a board, what we can act on relatively soon.
It's a good question. Certainly the reduction of costs, both in examining contracts as they renew, and just it wasn't the most popular item that we put up there, but doing an across the board cut is something where we're considering all options right now, mostly related to the reduction of expenditures. I'm currently exploring property insurance right now. I did share that with Finance Committee the last time we met. The steps I'm examining there and who I'm talking to. There are some of the items in the retain and recruit group that we're going to be talking about in this budget session, right?
So also, every member of ELT is meeting with Mr. Scott. We've been on this journey together, and every member of ELT was a chairperson for these committees. So they have been reviewing their budgets from the fall, and then just in the past month, they've been meeting with Mr. Scott and talking through where are efficiencies that they can realize as we move into next year. And so that's happening right now. Another item is around operational efficiencies. And so when we have vacancies come up, that is where we pause and examine, how can we rearrange, what might we do differently to where we may not need to fill a position through attrition. So those are all things happening right now that our operational efficiency group really was hitting on from the very beginning about examining, how things are structured and is there any redundancy. So anywhere where you see the guiding priority, those are the words from the committee, and really landing on those guiding priorities. Probably by the second meeting, those were fleshed out, because we know the legislative session can pivot at any moment. And this is really about putting ideas on the table that, some will be quicker to get to. So good question. Some are going to take some time. And so even, Mr. Scott working with legal counsel on how can we be revamping our rental agreements right now. and then comparing what we charge with the benchmark districts. So like all that is in motion right now. So good question.
All right. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Also under generating revenue, study naming and, this is really tiny to see, but naming and advertisement of facilities.
Yes.
Is that to increase people renting, or what would that be?
That would be similar to right now. What is it called where the Spurs plays at the AT? It's the Frost Center now. So those name that's going to be a similar type example. All right. So looking ahead.
So looking ahead, our fourth group was Reach and Impact. And this was a group really tasked with how do we get the word out? And so this is a lot of energy in this group, but really felt passionately that our guiding priorities were to be making sure that we tell our story in a way that best educates the community and influences legislators, that we ensure fact-based messages are simple and easy to understand, and that we identify strategies and platforms for sharing the message. So these guiding priorities will be great as we go through this budget season, and anything that comes up, kind of refer back to, hey, what did we hear in BSAC? What are those guiding priorities? We heard from our community because this was very much a heavy led community effort. And so right off the bat, you can see many of you in this picture here who went to Austin, and many of our BSAC members, and I recognize some of our CLA members were in this group that went to Austin. So we're thankful for them to go, and I know a number of you have gone up there at further times, and Leadership Boerne has had a day at the Capitol, and Annie Sider was at the Capitol recently for some special education advocacy going on. But these are just some slides from our last meeting, really reiterating timing is important, and that our community has a very strong voice and can make a huge impact. So putting these dates, top of mind of what's happening in the session. And then Dr. Dominguez has been building out some items that are at your fingertips. And so there'll be website pages that have gone live with these resources. There'll be a link to Bills to Watch. She's built infographics and video clips, and also linked in legislator fact sheets. So it's easy to get a hold of your legislator. And then to further show the impact that Boerne ISD is having in Austin, these are just two video clips from social media. On the left, you can see the BISD group there at the Capitol. And what's been so amazing is the energy that you're pulling in our neighboring partners. And so Comfort ISD, Blanco ISD went with Boerne to the Capitol, and just shows such a united front for the Hill Country region. And then on the right, that was a video taken from that visit, but it has made its way all around the state of just the good work that's happening when we have a community that comes together, that's informed and has the facts and is passionate and makes a huge difference. We're not going to show that video clip, but I can send it to you if you'd like to see it. And then I'll turn it back over to Mr. Scott for just a recap of the budget timeline.
All right, we're currently in March in Budget Workshop 2. Next month, Larissa Flores will talk to us about program initiatives, and then in May we'll come back and I'll present the first real picture of the overall budget at that point in time. By May, we'll have our preliminary property values. Prayerfully, we'll know something more about what's going to come out of Austin, and in preparation for that adoption date in June. All right. Yeah.
So Carlin, Garrett, and Rich were the 3 Finance Committee members who attended the meetings. Would you like to share any insight from the process before we move to the next topic?
I was just amazed at the engagement in the room. The first meeting when we kind of announced, or when Mr. Scott talked about, where Boerne ISD sits in state funding at the 9th lowest funded, eyes around the table became big as silver dollars because there was a lack of knowledge of that. And so that really created an environment of engagement where there was a thirst for knowledge. And I think from my perspective, that really kept the group engaged. And I mean, they were there to help solve problems. And so well led by the district. I love the 4 breakout groups. But I would say just the advocacy that it created accomplished what we were looking for.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Carlin said. The other thing that struck me was it was a very, very bright and committed group of people, and how quickly they understood a very complicated topic, which is school finance. I mean, it's incredibly, absurdly complex, but they grasped it and were serious about the mission. So I thought it was a productive use of time, and I would love to see the education that they received expanded to more people in the district. And I know, I think I saw like a 2-minute video. I don't know when that's going to get released, but it's a good primer and a good opener, which is really good because our community needs to know. If you ask the average person on the street, they would say, well, we're a wealthy community. Yeah, but that doesn't translate into wealthy funded schools.
Yeah, y'all really said everything there, I think, and I agree with all those comments. I think that if you look at some of those slides where people were voting on the different things that they would be interested in taking action on, it kind of, the way that some of that stuff was coalesced around, what I tell people a lot is that in the Boerne community, I feel like if everyone understands the issue, which this is a very complex issue, but if people actually understand it, probably 95 to 99% of the people out there would make the exact same decisions that we do, you know, when we're making decisions, if they have all the information and understand the issues. So I think that was kind of a example of that, where you have everybody come together and educate, and they understand the issues, and people really, you know, have a tendency to see things kind of the same way. So.
All right, well, thank you so much. We felt it was important for you all to hear that update as we just wrapped up the work. And this work will continue. This will be a very important committee that we continue to engage, keep informed, find other ways for this committee to get plugged into other committees happening around the district. So we're very thankful for all of our BSAC members and their commitment to Boerne ISD and continuing the great work that we offer our families and our students here. So the first budget workshop we had in February, Mr. Scott was laying the foundation, kind of running the numbers of a starting point. And our second meeting is focused on staffing and compensation tonight.
So I'm going to jump right in. Hopefully this is ready to go. And just to talk about what the purpose of this presentation is, first of all, we want to look at preview and discuss some compensation scenarios for the 25-26 school year. We also want to talk about the possibility of adding a special education stipend for, I just realized it says 2056, sorry, 2025. Jumping way ahead there. And then also want to talk about some of the key features of the teacher incentive allotment and some of the potential legislation that's coming down that may impact that. So as a recap, in the first budget session, the projections for student enrollment were shared. And some of the notable adjustments that were identified were new local private schools, declining kinder enrollment, and the possibility of vouchers. And so the district is adopting the reduced scenario as it looks at budget expenditures. As you guys are aware, the way that Mr. Scott does our budget is we always overestimate expenditures and underestimate revenues so that we can make sure that we are fiscally solvent. So we are looking at the reduced scenario as we go through these projections. As a reminder, in terms of our staffing ratios, this is where we fall right now. So for pre-K, we are at 18-1. Our kinder through fourth grade classes are at 22-1. For fifth grade, we go up to 25-1. And then at our 6th through 12th grade, we are at 26-1. And so these are ideal ratios. We do sometimes go over these numbers. As a district of innovation, we are able to go above these ratios if needed, but we try in all aspects to stick as close as possible to these staffing ratios in the best interest of our students.
This year's budget, I know the lower forecast was 11,037. The lower forecast was 11,037 for enrollment. The recommended was 11,169. We were smack in the middle at 11,101. Did we base our teacher budgeted? But I know for budget purposes we budgeted 11,060. So we were cautious, and we beat that by close to 50 students, which will help with our revenue. Did we budget our number of teachers on the budgeted amount of 11,060 or on the demographer forecast of 11,169? Of 11,169. Okay, thank you.
Even though we budgeted at that lower amount, it did give us some ability to adjust. So we did have some teachers at the elementary level that moved to different campuses to level out some of those larger classrooms. So we always try to keep some wiggle room in there, because we know at elementary, that's if we have to do leveling, we want to make sure that we have space in there to do some adjustments as needed.
Oh, remind me on these ratios, what about being a district of innovation allows us to go above that?
We have specific language in our district of innovation that if we go above the state ratios, we are not required to request a waiver. We can go above state ratios in our classrooms to be able to meet our enrollment needs.
We're doing stuff that normal districts wouldn't do for innovating, and so they kind of allow you to take some liberties with that. What's the thought behind it?
So districts of innovation started several years ago, and it allowed districts to have just more flexibility. Sometimes I'll give you an example, if we have a classroom, say we have a classroom of kindergarten, and we have one classroom that goes over by one student. If we are required to maintain that 22-1 ratio, we would need to add an additional teacher for that one to be able to meet the needs. So we'd be adding an additional teacher for being one student over. So what the District of Innovation is allows campuses or districts to make adjustments that meet the district's financial needs, but also are in the best interest of students. And so a lot of the District of Innovation components are not necessarily tied to class ratios as much. There are a lot more that are tied around certification requirements and around CTE and hard to staff areas, but districts are able to use the District of Innovation to make staffing ratio adjustments as well.
And also keep in mind, so when you are all staffed up for the year and you have a few more students enroll than you anticipate, it's very hard to find that best teacher at that time of the year. And so that is also a time when we are hiring teacher assistants to provide additional support in classrooms.
That touches on exactly kind of what I want to talk about. And it's more about, for the people that are sitting here, is what the pre-K classroom looks like, the dynamic situation that has in the teacher ratio. It maybe looks a little skewed whenever you see this, but whenever you go into that classroom, and I beg of you all to try to go into a pre-K class and read, and you'll see that 18 kids with those needs is quite a lot of. Can you speak on that dynamic?
So in our pre-K classrooms, we will have at least one teaching assistant, and depending on student needs, there could be more. So a lot of our pre-K classrooms actually have two teaching assistants in them. And so while we have an 18-to-1 ratio, a lot of times if you consider that there's at least one and sometimes two adults in the room, that really takes the teacher-adult ratio down to about 9-to-1 or 6-to-1. And there are other situations, we work really closely with Annie Sider and her team. When we have students that have more exceptional needs, we may end up putting a one-to-one teaching assistant in just to provide additional support to students.
Speaking of, that classroom has a unique feel because you have kids that are on pace, kids that need special attention, same classroom. Struggle.
And probably Larissa can probably speak to this more effectively, just because early childhood falls in her area, but the classrooms that we have are a mixed group. So we do have those students who qualify for special education services. Military students are students who fall into economically disadvantaged, some of those groups. And then you do have special education students in those classrooms as well. And so we do have one unit, I believe, at Cibolo Creek that is purely a special ed unit. And then our other classrooms are mixed units. And so the teachers do a great job at really trying to identify how to support our students the best way. But the other aspect of that environment is when you're thinking about students who have maybe some developmental delays, when they are around students that are progressing on a quote-unquote normal track, right? It's really a great process for students to be mixed because students learn about each other, and students who may be struggling have models of students that are at age-appropriate levels to look at as well.
Jill, do y'all have any staffing ratios set up for special education that you can maybe share with us for the different levels?
So the special education ratios, we staff for like our life skills classrooms and our behavior classrooms or our behavior support at a 12-to-1 ratio. So for every 12 students, there is a teacher and a teaching assistant. And then the special education department is able to make adjustments to those based on student need. And so,
remember, special education services are based on the student's IEP and the student's services, right? So what our special education team does is they do like an intensity of services study. So they're reviewing all the art paperwork on the IEP to see how many minutes, what intensity of services those students need, what grade level they're going to be in, what's their instructional setting, be it life skills or resource, and that will dictate kind of our personnel plan, more so than teacher-to-student ratios with more of your regular education kiddos.
That makes a lot of sense.
The other thing she looks at is all of our special education teachers manage what we call a caseload. So you're assigned a number of students as special education teachers where you're tracking their progress and keeping up with their IEP. And so that can get too large too. Like if we hire too many TAs and not enough teachers, TAs can't keep a caseload and progress monitor. It has to be done by a teacher. So while we can save money by doing TAs, if we do that too often, the caseload the teacher has to manage becomes too large. So we also factor that into account when we do special education staffing as well.
You know, the reason I asked before about what we budgeted our teachers, the teacher count, which number we used, was because a little history. If you go back to prior to House Bill 3 in 2019, our district had about 28 waivers one year at the elementary K through 4 level. That was a lot. Money was really, really tight. And then, you know, House Bill 3 passed, and we were able to greatly reduce the number of waivers that we asked for from the state. Now, as Jill mentioned, if you're one student over at a grade level, if you're one student over that 22-to-1 ratio, you're supposed to hire another teacher. Well, is that really a wise thing to do or fiscally responsible? You know, probably not. But if you're 5, 6, 7, or 8 kids over, that's a different story. So we really dramatically reduced our number. It would be interesting to know district-wide this year how many. I know we don't have to apply for a waiver because of the District of Innovation. Be interesting to know how many waivers we actually would have had if we did have that, because we've been as high as almost 30, and that was at a time when we had less students and less classes. That was back when we had 6 elementary schools. So now we have 8. So that would be interesting to know that. But the other thing is, I agree with you, Jill, with what you said. By staffing at a level that's a little bit higher than we're budgeting for in terms of our revenue, which will be the 11,237, that gives us the flexibility next year to move if we need to move, because you can do enrollment district wide, and our demographer is really pretty accurate on the overall district enrollment, but it can vary by 30 to 40 kids at the elementary level, and that's a lot harder to do it at that micro level. So it's a good thing that we have that flexibility, and I would encourage us as we put our budget together that we have that same flexibility for next year.
We're actually looking at that information right now as an executive team to determine what our staffing should look like for next year.
It's also quite an honor to be a district of innovation. I know it's something that's earned and it's something that we have to meet requirements for. Is this something that has to be shown or proved every year? How long does our district of innovation status go on for?
So our district of innovation is for 5 years, and then each 5 years, then the board can adopt a revised or amended plan based on district needs. You do have to maintain at a specific level because we haven't had accountability ratings over the last couple of years. I think the state has not enforced that. But typically, if a district falls below a C level, then or at a C level or below, then the state can come in and actually remove your district of innovation. And so it's really designed. What they don't want is they don't want people relying on the approvals that come through a district of innovation, and then have a negative impact on student achievement. Okay. So now that we've kind of set the stage and you can see where the assumptions come in, wanted to look at some compensation scenarios. So just so you're aware of where our employees fall and into which groups, this was calculated about a week ago, and at that time we had 753 teachers, nurses, and librarians. So those are all of the staff that are on the teaching and learning, the TNL scale. That's the STEP scale. And then our professional employees, that encompasses not only our professional employees at central office, but also our counselors, principals, assistant principals, and different folks in those groups. Excuse me. And we had about 180 professional employees. Our paraprofessional employees is both our instructional paraprofessionals, like our teaching assistants, and also our clerical staff district-wide. And then our auxiliary are going to be any of our bus drivers, our trades, food service, custodial, and we had 246. And so you can see the bulk of our group is within that teacher, nurse, librarian area.
Are subs in that auxiliary?
Whoops. No, we don't actually include subs because they're not permanent employees.
They're 1099. Are they 1099 or is that?
They get a regular 1099, but they are or they get a W-2, but they are a sub only has to work 3 days during a semester to stay active as a sub. And so they may not have a regular paycheck, so we don't include them in the employee categories.
Can you unpack a little bit on, because we get this, you're seeing this probably on Instagram ads and everything coming from the state, is we have a bloated, at the head shed, or the leadership is so bloated as far as personnel, and that's where a lot of money is spent. But until you really dig into the weeds and you realize how many of those professional roles are actually at an elementary level, a high school level, a middle school level, that are in the day-to-day, work of a school. Can you give us kind of an idea of like an elementary school? How many professionals would we have at a said elementary school with 700 students?
So at an elementary school, you're going to have your principal, your AP, counselor. You'll have your
dyslexic teachers and that.
Those are going to fall into your teacher category, but you'll also have like your art facilitator, speech pathologists, LSSPs.
So I imagine you're looking at about 8 or so?
Probably, depending on the size of the elementary, 5 to 8. At our high schools, you're going to have a much larger, because if you think about our high schools have a principal and they typically have, four or
Multiple
5
counselors, yeah.
assistant principals and a similar number of counselors. And so that, like I said, that professional number, and I can get the breakdown for you specifically of what it looks like at each
I
campus.
just think, and I've been seeing it, but I think it's really good for the community to realize where that breakdown is, because you look at this like, oh wow, it seems like, a quarter of our staff is here, and that's not the true nature of the business.
So that's a great question. And so as a reminder to everybody, because we have 2 new trustees, these workshops are a time for you to ask questions. We may not have the answer, but we're jotting down your questions, and we can either circle back if we need to add a topic at the next meeting, or I can send it out to you in one of our board updates so that you have that. But that's a great question.
So I also wanted to just provide a reminder of the compensation increases that have occurred so far this year. In September, we adopted a percentage increase for each of the different groups, and you'll see those broken down. So for our auxiliary paraprofessional, those groups received a 2.5% increase. Our teachers, nurses, and librarians received a 1.5% increase. Our professionals that were in the grades of APO 1 to APO 6 received a 1% increase, and then any of our professionals in that above that APO 6 received a 0.5% increase. And so that was where we started the year. And then in September, if you'll remember, we came to you and asked to increase our individuals in transportation that were driving buses, so our bus drivers and our fleet mechanics that also had CDLs and were driving buses, by $3 an hour, and that made a significant impact in the way that we were able to fill those positions. We also asked for the $7,000 highly specialized stipend for those highly specialized roles. While it didn't make as much of an increase as we were hoping, because we were after the start of the school year, what we have stopped hearing is we're not hearing the buzz that people are planning to leave us anymore. So that's a great thing. We also have, in just the last couple of weeks, hired a new LSSP and a new SLP, and we're getting ready to hire an SLPA. So we're making some progress on those areas, and we've already made contact with a number of individuals for next year. So we do anticipate, hopefully we'll be fully staffed. I can't say that with 100% certainty just yet, because we are still under the market in those areas, but that $7,000 increase has definitely made an impact with that group of employees. In October, we did provide a retention incentive for our transportation employees, and so that was something that was announced in the spring. And those employees, they had to be employed on the last day of the 23-24 school year and return to their designated position for the 24-25 school year. And if they did that, then in October they received that incentive. The board also approved a $300 incentive for all full-time employees who were hired by November 18th. And then in January, we did a $1.25 an hour increase for our auxiliary and paraprofessional employees. And most of the groups were included there. There were some individuals that were excluded, like our temporary employees, our contracted employees, substitutes. It mainly applied to our employees that were permanent employees. It did not apply to those transportation individuals who got the increase in September. Any questions there?
Jill, on the, I know our pay scale, our local committee position, I think it's one of the TAs was $13.20 an hour. And of course, anyone that was hired at that would have gotten the $1.25. Did that, for all intents and purposes, change our pay scale, or is our pay scale still at the $13.20, or is it really at the $14.45?
No, we did. We actually increased the pay scale to reflect the $1.25 at each min, mid, max. on each one of the pay scales. So we have actually seen that increase make a pretty significant difference for us on our auxiliary side. We are still having some challenges in terms of filling our paraprofessional vacancies. We have seen some improvement, but still at a lower level of fill rates in that paraprofessional side.
Well, I mean, the fact that we went from 18 openings in custodian at the beginning of the year to 0 now, I think is incredible. That's a very good job. Well done on that. The question then becomes is, and I'm not going to get ahead of it because I know it's a couple of slides down, but the different options for pay raises next year, a 3% on some of these auxiliary folks would get them up to 15 an hour. And there's just something psychological about that threshold, you know, that I think would make us more competitive, especially now that Buc-ee's is turning dirt. Who knows when it'll be finished, you know?
Yeah, so we're hoping that Buc-ee's doesn't have a significant impact. In talking with other districts that have had Buc-ee's open in their area, one of the things that they did point out was while Buc-ee's has a higher starting rate, most individuals are having to work at the times when their kids are off, so spring break, Christmas break, Thanksgiving break, and so what they've seen is they might see people leave to go to Buc-ee's, but then they're coming back because they want to have a similar schedule to their students, and so we're hoping that that plays out in our favor.
I wanted to point out the $7,000 for highly specialized. I love the idea whenever that was brought to the board of what that looks like, and it's kind of a weird deal where you give a pay raise to save money as a district, and I'm excited to see what that looks like next year. So I would love, as we start next year in these contracts, you know, that are going to come due, what we can see as a gain on that if we actually see that as being a windfall and a good decision whenever we're going to hire.
I'm just taking some notes. Okay. So as you guys are aware, Governor Abbott has proposed a $4,000 increase, and it's changed a little bit since this slide was created. It may be slightly more for some areas and slightly less for others. But we wanted to show you, based on our current pay scale, what that would do at the different incremental rates, right? So it would take at that $4,000 level, if we land on that number, it would take our entry to $59,142. One of the decisions that was made in the district, I guess a few years back, was there was a push to increase the pay at more years of experience to really draw in a more veteran teacher base. And so you'll see a pretty significant increase there. If we look at our teachers who have 30 years, they're over 70,000. You know, when we get up to 45 years, 85,000. And so we do have a large number of teachers that come to us with years of experience because they want to be in the district when they have higher earning potential. And so this would be significant for our teachers to help us be more competitive, but we also have to be mindful if Comfort, Bandera, some of those smaller school districts get a larger raise, that could put their pay above ours.
I had a question because something that brought up that I think is going to pass as far as bringing teachers back that have already retired and us paying. It seems like it's a pretty huge penalty for bringing on these wonderful people that have a great experience and bringing them back in the district. We've kind of been disincentivized to bring them back. I would love to see what that looks like, how many of those we're paying already that are under that, and what that would maybe look like for retention, retirement, or recruiting. Because I have a feeling that we can definitely recruit a lot better whenever that opens up.
So with right now, if we bring back a retiree, the surcharge that we pay is 16%. So it can get very pricey. We have some retiree hires that we've brought back in high need areas just to ensure that we have certified teachers with our students. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I think we have about 6 right now that are teachers that we've brought back. You know, and it could be a strategy if the state decides to remove the surcharge, especially for teachers. We have a lot of teachers that sub for us and may consider coming back if it isn't something that could negatively impact their annuity. Right?
Don't they currently have to be full-time after they retire, rehire, for us to have the penalty? They have to be full-time, correct?
No. So anytime an employee goes over 92 hours a month, a retiree, then we are subject to the surcharge. So we do have a couple of bus drivers that are retirees that when we have needs when we have a lot of field trips and things like that, we may have a slight surcharge. We do have certain employees that are salaried employees that we have a continuing surcharge every month, but then on some of our other employees, then we may have a surcharge. We've got a couple of retirees we've brought back to maintain them under, as teachers, that we've brought back to maintain them under 92 hours a month so that we don't impact their annuity and they don't hit the surcharge for us. And so if the change happens right now, if a teacher wants to come back, they have to sit out for at least one full calendar year before they can come back full time. If they come back in less than a calendar year, they can only ever come back as a part-time employee. So if they go over that 92 hours a month, then they impact their annuity.
But to your point, retired teachers have phenomenal experience. And is that Senate Bill 26? There's one item in there that it could eliminate the surcharge. That would be phenomenal. That would be very helpful for school districts.
Absolutely. Okay. So Rich, to your point earlier, so here's an example. So right now, the way that the district the way that district has calculated salary increases is at the midpoint of the grade. The amounts that you're seeing here do not include increases to the fringes. We would calculate those based on the amount that's adopted. But you can see what a 1%, 2%, and 3% raise could look like for the district. Just to be mindful, this does not include any change to teacher, because that if we have a teacher increase, that would be covered through one of the other bills. This would just be our district cost to increase our auxiliary paraprofessional and non-teaching professionals.
Mr. Goodrich, I guess we'll do a pizza party for the SROs.
Well, it's under consideration. We looked at several scenarios, car wash.
Thank you for pointing this out. It's actually less than I thought it would be for all of our non-teaching positions. So I'm pleased to see that. But we could do what we did last year if we wanted to. Let's say do a 3 for professionals and a 3.5 for auxiliary or paras, if we wanted to. Correct?
That would be the board's decision. Yes.
And so this is our second meeting. It's March. There's a lot that still has to unfold, but these are good kind of benchmark numbers for us all to keep in mind, because I think last year we were down to the very last minute in June where you all were deliberating, what you were comfortable with. And so we can always build scenarios as other bills get introduced. Jill and her team will actively build those scenarios for you.
I'm definitely in favor of addressing it this way as opposed to your Christmas bonus situation type stuff.
Right.
I think this is absolutely right to address it for their retirement plans and everything.
Well, and I think it gives people at least an idea of where they might fall if they're aware of that before the school year starts. Okay. So also wanted to share with you, you saw in the recommendations from the BSAC committee, one of those was to look at a benefits committee to study TRS Active Care. So one of the challenges we have with TRS Active Care is we have to commit to TRS Active Care by December 31st. and TRS Active Care does not publish their premiums until May to June of the following year. So when we make a commitment to TRS Active Care, we don't know what the premiums will be. And so right now we have about 67.5% of our employees who participate in TRS Active Care. Through conversations with the Retain and Recruit group, one of the things that we talked about was we don't really know why people don't participate. We know that some people don't because they're retired military, but one of the questions that we'll actually actively pursue for the 25-26 school year is for those individuals that don't participate, what's the reason, right? Is it a function of cost, or is it that they have other insurance options, just so that we have that data? But you guys are aware that there was a pretty significant increase to TRS Active Care. It was over 13% to the cost of the premiums. So you can see that the district contribution did not increase this year. It remained the same as it was last year, but our cost to our employees did go up. And so in the 2 prior years, we did not see a cost to employee premiums or cost increase to employee premiums because the state was using ESSER funds, and then the district and also in some years the district increased its contribution slightly to make those adjustments. What we are hearing right now is TRS Active Care anticipates at least a 10% increase. There are a couple of different bills that TRS to try to get funding for TRS. If that funding does not come through, we will see more than a 10% increase. They're considering as much as a 20% increase.
Yeah, if I could add a few things. There is a bill to allocate $450 million from the state to keep the increase down to a 10. Okay, and that's challenging enough, because if you look at the lowest cost plan, which is the primary plan, that's about a $46 a month increase in the premium. Well, that's $550 a year. So if an employee gets a $900 raise, they're fundamentally getting a $350 raise because of the cost of benefits. Now, one thing for the benefit of our newer trustees you should know is that over the past 7-8 years, we have dramatically increased our contribution for benefits substantially. We're one of the few districts that actually differentiates between what we dedicate to employees and employee kids, spouses, families. And as you could see, the gap is $100 a month between an employee only and an employee family. Now, employee family rates are extremely high. About 2/3 of our enrollees are the employee only. Another quarter is employee kids. So that's 92% of our total is in those two categories. And actually, the premiums aren't that bad for those folks. If you've got a couple of kids on your plan, it's really not a bad premium. It gets really expensive with spouse or family, which is why we have just 7 or 8% in those categories. But I think if the state's looking at a 10% increase, and actually when you look at the premiums for TRS, is even though a 10% sounds outrageous, and it kind of is, it is outrageous, they're still competitive to a lot of other things. So it makes it, as Jill pointed out, a really tough decision as to whether to flip. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. We should always look at options and possibilities. But my gut is that we're going to have to really look strongly at an increase, a decent increase in the benefits contribution this year.
Whenever we're seeing these teacher allotments being pushed from legislature, can they be added or affected in this scenario, or is it just in pay? Can it be a benefit pay? What's that? Just pay. Okay.
I do think it's important for the new trustees especially. So when we increase the district's contribution to benefits, it does not count towards TRS and retirement. Only salary counts towards that in your 5 highest years. So if an employee is nearing retirement, they prefer a salary increase over a benefits increase.
What I would share is that when you look at employee only, the lowest cost plan, we cover about 77% of the total premium. And I'll just add this as an editorial comment, being in the business. That's not bad, but really good employers generally pay between 80-85% of an employee's premium. In many cases, it's more. Your Fortune 50 companies will do 90-95%. So I really think we've got to be very careful that if the employee rate goes from 426 for the primary plan to 465, and we don't change our approach, we're down to like 71-72%. And frankly, guys, that's not very good.
I mean, I'll just add it that this is why I think it's so important that before employees leave our district that we go over their individualized budget plans with them, because when you really closely and individually look at what we're contributing to their insurance, you know, their stipends, their retention incentives, it's not always greener on the other side. So, and sometimes they may not even realize how much we're contributing to those things.
Thank you for mentioning that. And one of Jill's projects this fall was to build a compensation summary. What you asked for, she was working on the compensation notice of compensation. That was a little bit challenging because not all the systems you need to talk to each other were talking to each other. And so folks on Sean's team had to write custom programming to get all the pieces to populate correctly. But we have a good plan that we could run those numbers and feel confident that we would have a compensation statement that we could be giving folks in the spring or in the summer.
I do have a question. So when Abbott's kind of throwing out that $4,000 teacher pay, would that be coming strictly from the state, or what are we hearing in regards to the funding for that?
That would be coming from the state. It would be similar to pay increases that have happened in the past with other bills.
And that's why it would be important that we're also running scenarios to take care of the whole system. But anything that comes in, you know, from the legislature would come with dollars attached, which we're grateful for.
So one of the other pieces that you saw in the recommendations that came out of BSAC was to consider special education stipends. And so we know that special education staffing remains a challenge. That's not a Boerne ISD challenge. That is a statewide challenge. That's a nationwide challenge. This past summer, we lost 26 special ed teachers, many of them to neighboring districts, and in most cases, they identified pay as the number one factor why they left. And so we did talk about that we added the highly specialized stipend, and that has actually helped those conversations. But you can see where our current staffing levels are. So we have about 84 inclusion teachers, 32 self-contained, and so self-contained are your life skills, your early childhood classrooms. We have our ARD facilitators, and then we currently have 2 homebound teachers. And so when we think about the special ed stipend considerations, we would be really focused on this group of employees that are on the right-hand side. Something also to note is we currently have 47 teachers in the district that have special education certifications that are not working in special education. And a lot of that, when we talk to teachers, there is no incentive for them to be a special education teacher with all of the additional monitoring of students and just the ARD paperwork and all of those things. Because there's no stipend attached to those positions right now. So wanted to bring this up for discussion. So Annie and I have looked at our teachers, looked at comparables. So I have some comparables for you there on the right. You can see that most districts have a $1,500 all the way up to $5,000 stipends. And so we were trying to come in somewhere kind of in the middle. just to try to be more competitive, since our base teacher pay tends to be lower than our surrounding districts. And so we were looking at a $1,000 stipend for our homebound teachers, a $3,000 stipend for our ARD facilitators and inclusion resource teachers, and then a $4,000 stipend for our self-contained teachers. And in talking with Annie, one of the reasons we really wanted to have that differentiation between inclusion and self-contained is it's more difficult to get someone to go into a self-contained situation. It also requires that they are dual certified, so they not only have to be special ed certified, but they have to be certified in the content. So EC 3.6, 4 through 8, and some of the new laws that may come into play could impact us more readily in high school in the certification areas. But we wanted to have some leverage there to encourage a teacher to be willing to go into a self-contained classroom, since those are our most difficult classrooms to staff. So wanted to open this up for discussion and any questions you might have.
Not really a question, more of a comment. I really appreciate, whether it's on auxiliary, paraprofessionals, special ed, you having done the research and homework to find out why people are leaving, to learn more about job satisfaction, which if we increase job satisfaction, that increases retention. So the quality of information you're sharing with us, I appreciate, and it's welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, the only thing I would like to bring up is I see a couple schools in there that are definitely going to have an influx of money to be used in this manner coming up this next cycle. So I'd be very, very interested in sort of chasing them from what they were last year, what their new founding might look like this coming year, because I feel like we might be adjusting to what last season's pay schedule were, and it might get a little scary with some of them getting a larger increase. So I just want to be cognizant of what the future holds in this pay as well, because we're going to be competing with that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. A lot of districts don't start to share this type of information until later on. Everybody wants to wait to see what everybody else is doing, and so we'll be watching this very closely. I know Annie has a lot of connections with other districts, and so as we get information, then we may bring updates back to you.
I know more money is going to be thrown at this through the state, so I think it's going to be a more competitive environment as we try to gain it.
Any other questions?
I appreciate bringing this special education stipend up to us. I think that, for the most part, our special education teachers, they feel a calling to work with these special education students, and it's tough for them in the classroom. And I think that I honestly wasn't aware that we weren't giving special education stipends. So thank you for bringing that. And that would just be for those close to 50 teachers who have their special education degree. Maybe it wouldn't necessarily affect like our life skills teachers. It would too.
So basically everybody that you see on this list, so the 84 inclusion teachers, 32 self-contained, the ARD facilitators, and the 2 homebound, they would all be eligible for those stipends.
That's great. Thank you.
And then the other piece I wanted to talk about was the teacher incentive allotment. And so we hear a lot about the teacher incentive allotment. And coming from a district where my prior district, we were one of the very first districts approved. In a district that has more needs, so your lower income and rural districts tend to have the greatest gains. And so a district within the teacher incentive allotment, a district creates a local designation system The two requirements that the state has is that it has to use the teacher evaluation system, T-TEST, or a locally developed evaluation tool that's been approved by the state, and student growth measures. Those are non-negotiables. Those are required when a district implements a local designation system. Districts can also include other district-determined metrics. So that could be like student surveys. It could be a variety of different elements. That becomes part of an application when a district creates its local designation system. And so when a teacher is designated, or when a district has a local designation system and they are able to designate teachers, the funding factors that determine the designation amount is based not only on the designation as either recognized, exemplary, or master, or like I mentioned, it can be based on the district's or the student's socioeconomic need and the school's rural status. And so at the recognized level, the range is between $3,000 and $9,000. Depending on the campus, it is based on the actual students that are enrolled in that campus. But if we look at the average in BISD, if we had a local designation system that was approved by the state, the average amount would be $32.95. So it would be definitely at the lower end of the spectrum. Same with exemplary. So the exemplary ranges from $6,000 to $18,000, and you can see the BISD average is about $65.91. And then at the master level, that range is $12,000 to $32,000, and then the BISD average is about $12,984. And so when a district has a local designation system, the district can hold back 10% of the allotted funds at the district level to help implement the program, and then the teachers receive 90% of the funds. So one thing I will mention is currently the way that the teacher incentive allotment works, teachers that have national board certification are automatically at the recognized level. And so with Senate Bill 26, there is a proposal to remove national board certification as part of the recognized level. If that goes through, what Senate Bill 26 says is that teachers who are currently receiving the recognized payout will be grandfathered for 3 years, and then after that point, if this goes through, then they would no longer be compensated at the for having national board certification. One thing to mention is when a teacher is designated, that designation is good for 5 years, and so that means it's also portable. So if a teacher leaves and goes to another district, so say for instance we were to implement a TIA local designation system, and we had a teacher that got designated at the master level, that teacher could then go someplace like SAISD or Harlandale, Edgewood, and could earn about 3 times as much as they would be making within Boerne ISD. And so I know when I sat on the Educator Advisory Committee when we were creating the teacher incentive allotment, there is concern around having that 5-year designation, but that is what was voted on by the legislators, and so that process does not appear to be changing. But if we were to implement a teacher incentive allotment, there are several processes within our own district that would need to change.
And on the flip side, we get an employee come to BISD who's a master in another district. We treat them as such.
Correct. So they would maintain that designation for 5 years. So when a district doesn't have a designation system, so right now we do have 2 teachers that are national board certified, and so we get an allotment, and once we get that paid out each year, we give that directly to the teachers, the full amount. If we have a teacher that comes to us and say they're in their 3rd year of their designation, since we currently do not have a local designation system, at the end of that 5 years, the teacher's designation would expire, and there would not be a way for the teacher to re-earn a designation. And so I want to kind of go through the process, because when you hear a lot about TIA, you hear a lot of great things, and for a lot of districts and a lot of teachers, it provides a lot of extra income. In Boerne, if we were to adopt a teacher incentive allotment program, it would not provide as much income. The other piece to be aware of is we would have to create a staff that could implement this. And so in my prior district, we did a phased-in approach, and so that would be my recommendation in the district. And if we did a phased-in approach, we would potentially look at teachers that had a star growth measure in that first phase. That's about 16% of our teachers. So out of our 700 teachers, that's about 120 teachers that would be eligible for consideration. And then the state puts limits on how many people you can actually designate. So out of that 120-ish people that would be eligible for consideration for a designation, we would only be able to designate about 40 teachers. So it would be a very small number when you initially roll it out. The way that you see those larger economies of scales is when districts are able to create processes to bring in all of those teachers that don't have a star growth measure. And that takes more staff to be able to implement those processes. The other piece that I want to share is that TIA is not something like, we wouldn't say, we want to go through and create a teacher incentive allotment, and then next year we would designate teachers. From the time you from the time you say, yes, we want to do this, until the time we have our first teacher payout is 4 years. And so in the first kind of year zero that I have here, we would want to engage in stakeholder engagement activities and also do an interest application to the state. So the interest application is due by April 15th. We currently don't have one with the submitted to the state, but if we as a district said this year we're submitting our interest application, that would start the clock for us. And so we would spend the first year in the application year. So from April 15th of this year until April 15th of next year, we would spend that year doing stakeholder engagement and creating an application. That application would be submitted to the state. If that application gets approved, then year 2 would be our data capture year. So that would be the first year where teachers who were in the eligible categories, where they would begin to capture their data. So we would look at their evaluation as well as their student growth and any other metrics that we determine that would be part of the local designation system. Once you have the data capture year, then in the summer after that data capture year, the team would have to do all of the data analytics. That data is submitted to the state in September of that year. And then the district doesn't get the yes or no nod until approximately March or April of the following year. And so, and when a district gets approved, it is not individual teachers. The state says, yes, your whole slate of teachers that you recommended gets approved, or they get denied. And so then the payout comes that August to September of the 4th year. So it is a long process. So if we were to tell the state by April 15th of this year that we wanted to pursue the teacher incentive allotment, our first payout would be August to September of 2029. So it's a long process, and I wanted to share that because a lot of people don't realize that process that is involved in the local designation system.
When you talk about the staffing piece, are we talking about one person to, what's the staffing piece?
So I think if we were to implement something like this, if we started out with a phased approach where we looked at teachers who had a star growth measure, we would be able to implement that with the staff we have. If we decide to bring on other measures, so in my prior district, we created academic performance assessments for content areas like Algebra 2, chemistry. That was a large endeavor that involved 2 additional staff members on the HR side, plus teaching and learning staff to create that. We also had like a data scientist and a database analyst, because when you're thinking about using MAP and Circle and student learning objectives as you bring in all of those other groups, I would say at a minimum we would need at least one staff member to bring on other groups, and it could be more depending on what the district chose to do in its application. It would all be dependent on how the district chose to how the district chooses or would choose to move forward with an application. There are a number of small districts that I'm aware of that when they bring on like student learning objectives, the SLO piece, they have to have one person that's the only thing that they do. So if a district chooses to use SLOs, that in and of itself is one position. That wouldn't include all of the other work that would go into that. So it's a large process, you know, and I will tell you from the perspective of a district that implemented it, while it provides great opportunities for teachers to earn increased compensation, one of the challenges it creates is it can sometimes cause that collegiality to decrease, because teachers might be of the mindset, why would I share with you when that would mean that you might get designated and I don't. So then you really have to put structures in place to make sure that teachers remain collaborative, because it can have that negative impact.
Can you go back to that last slide? Just make sure I understand this right. So on the master designation there's 12,000 to 32,000 is the range. Mm-hmm. And what you're saying there is that 12,000 would be the Boerne number. 32,000 would be the SAISD number, just because the different demographics. They get more per pupil funding annually. They would also get, so that's $20,000 difference.
The goal is really the idea behind teacher incentive allotment is it would entice teachers to go to the districts or the campuses that have the greatest need.
And does that work back the other way? Because it's good for 5 years. I mean, say somebody's making 32,000 at somewhere in San Antonio, and then they come here.
They drop down.
They drop down to the 12, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it is the allotment is based on the campus where the teacher is teaching.
And so this funding comes from the state?
It does.
Okay.
And they are looking to increase it. So there's because we always wondered, are they going to run out of money? But they've added a significant dollar amount to continue this process.
But the staffing portion to run this is not provided by the state, or that's paid
we
for?
We can hold 10% of the allotment back, but you still have. So when I started this in my previous district, we actually had an endowment from the Dell Foundation that allowed us to hire 5 individuals. And that was for the first 3 years while we got this off the ground, so that we would then generate enough money in that 10% set aside to offset some of the cost of the salaries. It typically won't cover the full cost of the salaries, and you can't attribute the full cost of the salary unless the person, that's all they work on. So if they have any other duties, then you can only attribute partial salary to that.
How much, you said, like when you might designate 120 teachers and then say 40 of those actually get payouts. And so out of our 700 plus teachers, or it's TNL, or it's just teachers?
It's just teachers.
Okay, so how many of those, say once this is clicking, like the first payout comes in 2029, say like 3 or 4 years after that even, when you would think this is clicking, everybody's designated that would get designated, and how many teachers are affected at that point, their pay, you think? Is it 20% of our teachers, 50%?
So the max amount that a district can designate in a single year is usually about 30% of their teachers. For a large, like my previous district, our largest designation group that we submitted in 1 year was about 400 teachers, but we had over 3,000 teachers. In most years, we were designating between about 100 and 200 teachers each year. And so a lot of it depends on the eligible group. Like I mentioned, if we were to do a phased-in approach and started with teachers that were that had a star growth measure, that's about 120 of our teachers. And so if we designated about 30% of those, that would mean out of the 120 eligible teachers, we potentially would be able to designate 40 teachers annually.
So it's good for 5 years. So for those 40, no matter what happens the year after that, for 5 years, they get a payout. Even if their test scores drop.
Correct.
It's good for 5 years.
Correct.
And so really, if you can only have 30% of your teachers designated at any given time, once you have a bunch of them designated, really that doesn't leave a lot of room to add more because it's good for 5 years and
Right,
you
and
really
so
can't add any.
So one of
after
the
a couple
things
years
that every teacher is every eligible teacher, their data is put up every year. So if your top 30% doesn't fluctuate, then you don't really, while you might be able to designate 30% of your teachers, you may not have 30% that fall into those categories. So as a district, you have to submit all of your teacher data, and you can't arbitrarily say, I'm going to take these 40 teachers are already designated, so I'm going to take the next 40. It is the top percentage. So it's about 5% who are eligible for master, and about 15% potentially that are eligible at the exemplary and recognized levels.
So in a community, I feel a district that thrives on collaboration and partnerships, and there's a chance that it does. It creates competitiveness in the work environment, or it can. Some districts it's great for. Could we go to the zero process, no harm, no foul, to zero, and then maybe we wouldn't move to one, maybe we would, but just so we're educating and informing and.
Yeah, so a huge piece of this would be stakeholder engagement. So when we went through the stakeholder engagement process, and the state requires you to identify and share your stakeholder engagement information. If you don't have about 80% of your teachers that are buying into this, it may not even be worth pursuing. Other districts that haven't pursued it at this point, part of the reason they haven't pursued it is because they don't have the teacher buy-in. And so we do have the opportunity, if we decide as a district that we want to go ahead and submit our letter of intent, and I've kind of shared what that does, right? The letter of intent notifies TEA that the district is considering developing a local designation system. It identifies those points of contact, grants us access to the portal as well as the training, but it is non-binding, so that's a good thing. So we could say we're going to explore this, and we could spend next year exploring it, talking with teachers, and we may come to January of next year, and teachers might say, you know what, we don't want to do this. There's no requirement for us to continue forward with that process.
So as I've shared, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, just a couple of thoughts on this. Garrett, if I'm not mistaken, it's somewhere around 3% right now is what is budgeted by the state. And I think we have to really pay attention to what the state's going to do in terms of funding the teacher incentive allotment, because both the House and Senate bills call for a very significant increase in this next budget. And the word we're hearing is that they want to continue this increase every time there's a budget cycle. So the train is going to leave the station, and how far do we want to be left behind? And, the reality is our district's a high-performing district, but that's just not the reality for most districts in the state. I mean, we saw the STAR results. We saw the mid-year report that Larissa gave us, and you've got, maybe we're 14% ahead on approaches, but we're 30% ahead on meets. We're 35% ahead on masters. There's a huge gap in achievement level. And I think if the state is serious about reaching its 60-30 goal, which is 60% of the kids have some sort of college or trade school degree by 2030, so that the state can continue to prosper. If there's even a remote chance of that, they're going to pump money into whatever they think is going to achieve that goal. So we just have to be aware of that. And, I know my daughter's in a district that's low performing, and she's doing really well, and she's very excited about getting a nice big boost, not next year, but the year after. So it's just something we need to be very sensitive to. And as far as what you mentioned, Christy and Jill, the whole collaborative approach, I mean, we have to make it work for Boerne, I think.
So if these teachers that are at other districts that get this, if they were to come to Boerne, then they'd no longer get that because we're not participating in the program?
They would get it at the rate that we are. So if you have somebody that's in like San Antonio ISD that's getting $30,000 as a master designated teacher, if they come to Boerne, it would be based on the campus that they're assigned to in Boerne.
Right, but
Even if we don't have TIA.
Okay, that was
Because
my
if a
question.
teacher, but then they wouldn't have a way to renew their designation later on. So basically, at the end of that 5 years, if we don't create a TIA plan, they don't have a way to get designated again.
Yeah, I'm with Rich here, though. I mean, I feel that this is going to be another lever the state pulls to fund, education. It was kind of interesting. I was reading the Constitution this weekend. I didn't see this in there. Weird. But yeah, it's. I don't think it's a great tool. Like y'all brought the negatives to it. I wish that they gave some leverage to districts and said, "Here's your 10% to honor teachers that deserve that." It frustrates me but I would love to see, like you said, I think moving them, like we talked about, putting this in motion and seeing, putting the wheels in motion to see what we want to do, but getting the feedback from the teachers, because I would hate to pull money that the state's going to give us and not allow teachers to benefit from that. But I would love to see what the teachers have to say in that regard.
And I'm really hoping that this piece that's in like Senate Bill 26 about taking national board off the table comes out, because that's a great alternative, for teachers to be able to get national board certified, because then they will always qualify at the recognized level in the current form of TIA.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what Dallas said when he leaned over and said, "What are your thoughts?" What I pointed to was that it's non-binding. And so I think at least starting the process, designating or gauging interest in the teachers is important. And I think if nothing else, it gives us the ability to renew teachers that do come to us, or we lose that edge. After 5 years, there's no incentive for them to stay. So.
Well, I will just add, Mr. Scott and I have held staff meetings across every campus the month of February, and they tend to ask us some of the same questions. Of course, one of them is about 4-day weeks, but then they also ask about TIA. And so we know that the state is doubling down on TIA. They want to tell districts where to put the money, and they are putting money in teacher incentive allotment. So I think we are kind of needing to explore that stakeholder piece, that engagement piece, to see what that may look like in Boerne. So
I was going to say, the other piece that we really need to be cognizant of is there are close to 50 districts right now that have approved TIA plans within Region 20. And so as a district that doesn't have a TIA plan, that may that could hinder us if we have teachers that are considering districts that have TIA plans that they want to come to.
So we have covered a lot of ground tonight. Thank you to Mr. Scott and to Ms. Rhodes-Pruin and our BSAC team and our ELT here, who was ready to answer any of your questions. We have a lot of our notes from questions that you all have asked. This conversation continues month after month, and so if other compensation questions come up, we can always run the numbers and we can get them to you. But we know this is a really important part of how we set the budget, is what we can afford in terms of compensation and how to build in benefits and all these other things. So that's our content for tonight, and our next budget workshop is scheduled for April 7th, and I did send y'all a message that there was a request to begin at 4:30 on April 7th, and so check your calendars. I see majority thumbs up, but if there's any other issues, please let us know, and Melanie can adjust calendar invites for 4:30. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. President.
that's all we've got. So the time is 7:08. I would entertain a motion to adjourn. First and a second. All in favor say aye. All opposed, same sign. We are adjourned.